like to acknowledge Dominique, the CEO of the National Retail Association, and as most of you would know, I'm the chairman of the National Retail Association. So thank you, Minister, for your time. You sort of were proactive in suggesting we do this, so thank you. And it's a great opportunity to hear from you about what's happening in this big world of COVID-19. So there's lots happening. So look, the format today, everybody, is the Minister will talk to us for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we have preloaded quite a number of questions, a very, very popular topic and also a very popular special guest. So there you go. We'll try to get through them as quickly as we can. I have to flag, I have to leave at about 20 to 12. My apologies. I've sort of rescheduled a few other things so we could participate in this today. So without any further delay, over to you, Minister. Before you sort of talk to us about what you want to talk about, you might cover this in your opening presentation anyway. What's life been like for you as a politician in these times?
You just don't, yep.
Now we're unmuted. Look, it's been, and thank you so much for having this Zoom meeting today. It's great to be able to touch base with everybody, but in particular, to sort of now run through where we're at, because if we'd had this meeting last week, we would be in a fundamentally different position. But given on Friday, we are now literally taking those formal steps to reopen the Australian economy. It gives the focus of today's meeting a very, very different lens. Just in terms of, Mark, what life's been like as a politician. Look, in terms of the speed and the pace, I have to say it hasn't changed. It's just more so the way we've been communicating has obviously changed. It's been a focus on policy. And as you can see, we've announced $320 billion in terms of our economic response, and just the speed at which we had to get all of that money out the door was absolutely incredible. And I don't think it's anything a government has ever faced before. But the good news for everybody on this call is the money is now well and truly flowing, and in particular in relation to the JobKeeper payment, what we've now seen is the money as of last week is now flowing into the bank accounts of employers. To all of those employers who signed up, and we're heading towards 790,000 employees formally enrolled for JobKeeper, a huge thank you to each and every one of you. We don't even begin to understand how difficult this period has been for you. But thank you for signing up to JobKeeper and for putting in place that process, which meant that your business either stayed open or in the event that you had to close your doors, you've maintained that connection with your employees. And to date, because of the almost 790,000 enrolments that we've had, around 5.1 million employees are on JobKeeper. If it wasn't for JobKeeper, as you all know, they would have been on JobSeeker. And Treasury estimates that our unemployment figures, which actually come out this Thursday, the 14th of May, for the period of April, probably would have been 5 percentage points higher. Unemployment is going to surge on Thursday. There is no doubt about that, unfortunately. But because of the measures that we have collectively been able to embrace together, it will be a lot lower than it otherwise would have been. Just to give you some comfort in relation to the other measures that we've put in place, that they weren't just press releases, they weren't just announcements by the government, that money is now formally flowing into the economy. In relation to the boosting cash flow for small and medium businesses that employ people, if you recall, that was the measure by which you received the maximum payment of up to $100,000 split over the 2 financial years, this financial year and next financial year, with the minimum payment directly into your bank account of $20,000. What we have now seen is this: 438,399 businesses are now accessing almost $8 billion in that cash flow assistance. So again, we made the announcement, businesses signed up for it, and that money, $8 billion is now getting back into the bank accounts of those businesses. A number of you had asked me about the wage subsidy for apprentices and trainees. If you recall, that commenced on the 1st of January, runs through until the 30th of September. And that's the scheme by which we reimburse you for up to 50% of the apprentice or trainee's wage subsidy. To date, almost 13,000 employers and over 22,000 apprentices have received more than $100 million. So again, the money is getting out back to employers where we need it to go. In relation to the early access to superannuation, as at the 8th of May 2020 now, over 1.2 million Australians have applied for release, and that's around $10.2 billion in superannuation will formally be released to them. One of the other queries that we've been receiving is in relation to the SME coronavirus guarantee. Now, if you recall, that was the government providing a guarantee of up to 50% of new unsecured loans of up to $250,000. As at the 5th of May, we've now had around $1 billion in loans approved. So that's just to give you an update as to where we are on those measures. The announcements were made, the processes were very, very quickly, as you know, put in place, but that money is now getting out to where we need it to get out to, which now gets us to where we are based on the announcements that were made following National Cabinet on Friday. And as you will be aware, we are now taking those formal steps to reopen the Australian economy. Now, I'm sure you've already got the roadmap to a COVID-safe Australia, but in the event that you haven't, Dominique or Mark, just let us know and we will ensure that you get all of the appropriate documentations. But the Prime Minister and National Cabinet have now formally announced the 3-step process to a COVID-safe economy. Now, why do we call it a COVID-safe economy? It's because in Australia, we have not chosen the pathway to eradicate COVID-19, because as you know, if we had chosen that pathway, the economy would remain locked up until we had found a vaccine. And we're very upfront about the fact that the vaccine is a long, long way away. So what are the steps that you have to take? We took the process of suppression. We put in place certain measures, and we have successfully, as we've now seen with the numbers that are coming out every day, we have successfully suppressed the virus in Australia. Why are we now putting in place, though, the 3-step process? And as the Prime Minister said, why do we need to crawl before we walk? Because as we open up the economy, because we have undertaken a suppression strategy, there will be more cases of COVID-19. As you open up an economy, you don't have a vaccine, you will get more cases of COVID-19. But the key now is managing those cases so we can quickly move from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. So we will, as a society, be living with the virus. That is what a COVID-safe economy is all about. The virus will be there, we will be functioning, and we will be successfully and safely living with COVID-19 until we find the vaccine. But based on the steps that we have taken to date, our health systems are now able to cope if we were to see a spike. But also we know how to successfully manage any outbreaks. And I'm going to yet again impress upon you, and in particular in terms of what you guys do for Australians, getting people to download the COVID Safe app. Downloading the COVID Safe app is the key to maintaining our suppression strategy. Why? Because when they come into your premises, if people have downloaded the COVID Safe app, if they have it running in the background, if their Bluetooth is turned on, and God forbid, someone is diagnosed with COVID-19. We will be able in a very, very short period of time to get in contact with other people who've been in contact with that person, and guess what? You can quarantine, self-quarantine, and get yourself tested. That is the way we successfully live with the virus over the next few months, but we move from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 as quickly as possible. Insofar as the federal government is concerned, we want us to move to step 3 no later than July. July, as far as we're concerned, the economy has to be up and running in a COVID-safe manner. I am pleased that, for example, in relation to step 1, my home state of Western Australia, we're already there. And as of next Monday, we're actually moving to step 2. So in terms of where we're at as an economy, we will open up as quickly as possible. Obviously, other states are making their own decisions, and Daniel Andrews, I understand, will address Victorians in the nation later on today if he is not already doing that. But as far as we are concerned, this economy needs to open up. You guys are absolutely key to opening up the economy. We need people to be spending in your businesses, but at the same time, we all need to work together to ensure that we are successfully monitoring the spread of the virus and ensuring that if someone is found to have it, we quickly as possible work out what to do so that suppression strategy maintains and we reopen by July, and within reason we are functioning in a COVID-safe environment. And with that sort of setting the scene as to where we have been, where we are and where we're going to, back over to you, Dominique and Mark.
Thank you, Minister. That was a very comprehensive overview, and look, there is a general feeling from our members and the broader community that the federal government's been doing a very, very good job in managing this very difficult situation. Dom, I thought we just might give the Minister a voice break for a minute or two, and you provide her and the other people listening in, some feedback we've been getting from our members, and then you might facilitate some of these questions that have already been preloaded. Dom and Minister, just when Dom's finished, probably just get your comments on this access to superannuation. There's been some talk about the fraud, so just sort of a bit of an update on what's happening with that. Okay, Dom, over to you.
Thanks, Mark, and thank you very much, Minister, for joining us today. We are incredibly pleased to see that we have over 138 of you here joining us this morning, and certainly what we've been doing within our membership has been surveying just the impact of COVID-19 on all of our retail members. And what we know is that in the month of March alone, that we lost over $1 billion, and that April it was significantly more than that. So there's no doubt that COVID-19 has absolutely impacted our industry and will continue to do so as we slowly reopen. For many of our members, we know that there's been some issues around certainly managing your labour during this time, and that JobKeeper's gone quite the way to assist with that as well. We also know there's been a range of issues around leasing and tenancy, and of course some of the surcharging happening with delivery companies as well. So we've been really focusing on some of those areas that you've been reporting to us have been points of difficulty for you, and working on solutions for you. So you would have seen, of course, that now we have a range of state legislation in place around leasing. Regulations are slowly being published in each of those states and territories across the country. And hopefully you are receiving some of that relief shortly, which should be helping your businesses. But look, what we know right now is that certainly our businesses are implementing the hygiene protocols. Today, we release our roadmap to retail recovery, which is a guide for helping you emerge from hibernation. So you'll all get a copy of that at the end of this webinar, and also you'll be able to download that from our website as well, which will direct you to any information that you need over a range of different topics. But slowly we're seeing people open. We know that there's been record trade reported over the weekend in a number of shopping centres, particularly in New South Wales and in Queensland, and that's really good news. I think Mother's Day went quite the way to help that happen. Of course, we are still waiting on some categories to reopen, and so we're very much awaiting stage 2 and stage 3 so that our beauty members can obviously open, and also our fast food cafes and restaurants and hospitality get back to what they were doing you know, we know many of you are certainly implementing as much social distancing as you possibly can. And you've also implemented all their alcohol-based hand sanitizers and cleaning regimes, amongst other things. So we're very thankful for that, because it's giving our consumers comfort about returning. And it's all about making sure people feel safe coming back to those locations, whether it's strip shops or shopping centres or wherever it might be that you're located. So look, I might just pop onto some of the questions that our members have sent through to the Minister. And look, you know, I think, Minister, as has been pointed out, I mean, JobKeeper has been absolutely crucial for many of our members at this time. However, right now, trying to get back to work, they are having some issues with casual workers refusing to work because of either the higher rate of JobKeeper compared to what they have been previously receiving. Would the government consider reducing their entitlement to JobKeeper if they are unwilling to make themselves available?
Thank you. I just took myself off unmute there. I'm just going to quickly address the superannuation issue. And I know that Michael Sukkar has addressed this. And just so you all know, it is not a compromise of the ATO. It was referred to the AFP. It's a case of identity theft, essentially, where bogus claims have been put through the early release of super scheme. We take this very, very seriously. The matters are being investigated by the AFP. To put it in perspective, as I'd said previously, at the time that Michael gave this interview, we'd had 1.2 million people applying for the early release of superannuation, which is, as I said, well over in excess of $10 billion. If you put that in perspective, there's been one isolated incident where identity theft have been involved. So it is not a compromise of the ATO. It is being investigated by the AFP. As part of that process, the ATO paused requests for early superannuation being sent to super funds. However, my understanding is, and I will confirm this whilst we're actually in this call, they have recommenced today. So it was literally a pause over the weekend, but we have had a recommencement of the access claims going straight through for the superannuation. But when you put it in perspective, 1.2 million people and one case, we take it seriously, refer to the AFP, it is being investigated. Now, just in terms of casuals, one of the things that we obviously had done is amend the Fair Work Act so that you could reduce an employee's hours, but we didn't get the agreement that you could increase an employee's hours. What we had always said, though, is this: there would be a review of JobKeeper at the end of the 3-month period. That is in June. So what we will be doing is reviewing. So any information that you can get us in relation to how the scheme is working for you on the ground will feed into our review. But what I will say is this: even with the changes that we made to the Fair Work Act for the COVID-19 period, and we always said they were only for the COVID-19 period, the JobKeeper scheme itself does not disturb the ordinary employment obligations. So if an employee refuses to attend work, the terms and conditions of the employment contract continue to apply, including your standard disciplinary procedures. So yes, while we made changes to Fair Work to assist you all with JobKeeper, it was in relation to the reduction in employees' hours, because that was what we were being asked to do. There will be the review at the end of June, so feed us in the information. But in relation to everybody else, JobKeeper does not disturb what our employment contract itself says, and you are able to take disciplinary action in the normal way that you would normally do that.
Thank you. And so from one of our members in a small country town, they say that it's been harder for them to reopen. They're asking, what is government doing to support regional areas?
Look, it's a very, very good question. And you know, being a Western Australian, again, I talk to people from rural and regional Western Australia all the time. And without a doubt, you are disproportionately affected by so many things. I mean, look at the bushfires. So what we've done is we've set aside $1 billion to support those regions and communities that have been disproportionately affected by the economic impacts of COVID-19. In particular, those heavily reliant on industries such as tourism, agriculture, and education. I will get you through, in case you are not aware, what the $1 billion is being used for. But for example, the waiver of fees and charges for tourism businesses that operate in the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, the waiver of entry fees for Commonwealth National Parks, additional assistance to help businesses identify alternative export markets or supply chains, very, very targeted measures will also be developed to further promote domestic tourism. We had the announcement again today by David Littleproud in relation to the further work that's been done, albeit on the bushfires, because we cannot affect, there are still some rural communities that on top of COVID-19 have been affected by the bushfires. So there's additional support coming there. But also, even in relation to my own portfolio of employment and employment programs, how can we specifically target employment programs to look at the issues being faced in particular by rural and regional communities? So we do have the $1 billion fund. And as I said, I will get that for you so that you know exactly what we're looking at. But again, as part of any process, we've always said that the response that we put in place has to be targeted, has to be scalable, has to be measurable. So continue to feed us through information, because our response will change as we see COVID-19 wash through the communities. So please do keep us informed, in particular of the impact on rural and regional communities, because we're completely aware that they are disproportionately affected and will require far more targeted responses. And I can confirm, Michael Sucker's office have just confirmed with us the early access to super claims, they are being processed again as of today.
Wonderful. And so for our members, just so you're aware, if you do have any feedback, obviously for the federal government, regardless of the minister, we are feeding that through the business liaison unit, through the Treasurer's office. So you can send them directly to me, and we'll make sure that that goes through to whichever minister you require. So just back on to JobKeeper, Minister, is the government planning to continue JobKeeper subsidy after September 2020?
Look, and it's obviously a question now that is coming fast and furious. We'd always said 6 months. The period that we'd allowed ourselves for COVID-19 was that 6-month period through to September. We always said that there would be a review at the end of the 3-month period. We've been very upfront that it was being introduced as a temporary measure to support employers to maintain that connection with employees. What I would say to you though, again, is whatever information you have, please get through to us, because the review will be occurring. You're only about sort of 6 or 7 weeks away from that review, and we need to understand the impact of JobKeeper on the ground. But I think the Prime Minister has been pretty clear, and as you know, the Treasurer will be addressing the nation tomorrow when he gives his financial update that would otherwise have been the budget, but he will be addressing the nation tomorrow with a financial update. The picture of the economy will become clearer, but we had been pretty clear. It was a 6-month temporary measure, but it would always have that review at the end of the 3-month period. So I can't impress upon you enough, keep that information coming to us in relation to the impact on the ground.
Wonderful. And so for many of our hospitality and fast food businesses, as I alluded to before, I have a question here. My business has managed to continue to sell food on a takeaway basis, but we've had to use food delivery apps like Uber Eats, which take a large chunk of our profits. Would the government intervene or be prepared to provide support to businesses who have had to rely on these apps?
It's a really interesting one in terms of, I commend those businesses who literally overnight adapted their business model, embraced digital technology, and started selling online. So in terms of the broader conversation that I believe we all need to have as we emerge from COVID-19, and the fact that, as we all know, the economy's now changed. We're not going back to, and the Prime Minister's made that pretty clear as well, globally, we are not going back to where we were in January and February of this year. We will emerge with a very, very differently focused economy. And that does mean that we need to have that conversation about those businesses that have not yet embraced digital technology and the benefits that it brings to you, and the ability that it brought to business to adapt. That is going to be part of the conversation I really do want to have with you going forward. But in terms of, has the government given any thought to whether or not we would introduce additional measures? At this point in time, the $320 billion package is the $320 billion package. But that does not mean that we can't work with you as we come out of COVID-19 and we emerge into the new economy that we're going to be in. And from my perspective in particular as the Small and Family Business Minister, that discussion about how we embrace digital technology, but we bring with us in particular those businesses who perhaps have not had that digital presence we needed them to have. I think that this is a really, really relevant part of any conversation that we have going forward, because this is the new economy that we are all going to live in and we're going to be doing business in going forward.
Just picking up on that, some of our members are certainly reporting that they have had spikes in their online business during this period, and that consumers and unusual demographics for consumers have moved to that space. So your plus 50s and your 20 to 25s buying more online. What role do you see the NBN infrastructure playing in small business recovery?
Well, more than anything, access to the NBN is going to be incredibly important. And in particular, having delivered on rolling out the NBN as a government means that more and more Australians than ever before now have that access to faster and more reliable internet connections when they need it. And I think, again, when we talk about what's this economy that we're going to have sort of post-COVID-19, and it goes back to the rural and regional question that was asked, I think what you'll find is people will actually want to work from home more than they have previously, which means they'll make different decisions as to where they live, which does then present those opportunities for rural Australia in particular, even regional Australia, to put, your hand up and say, we actually offer a fantastic lifestyle choice. And I think what these past few months have given people, despite the devastation, and no one is going to underestimate the devastation that we've seen on the Australian economy. But it does make people start to think in a very, very different way. And I think you'll find that working from home becomes I'll actually do that option for so many more Australians. Or alternatively, I'll work 2 days at home and I'll drive into the office 3 days a week. So what that says to so many of us is there are different opportunities that are now presented. But what do all of those opportunities hinge on? Getting access to technology and getting that access when you need it and where you need it. So certainly in the discussions that I've been having with Paul Fletcher, the NBN is working with the internet providers to ensure that Australian homes and businesses have that continued access to fast, reliable broadband, both now, but Dominique, as you so rightly point out, it's during that recovery phase and then embedding it as we go forward, if we are going to embrace all of the opportunities that are presented to us in terms of what COVID-19 has done to us, but what it's also enabled by way of choices that previously maybe we hadn't thought of as a society, but now become very, very real choices for us as we move forward.
I think we certainly are having some concerns from our membership just in relation to what will happen in that reasonable recovery period. And certainly Sharon here sent in a question saying, if you don't qualify now for JobKeeper, can you still apply in case you get a downturn after May the 30th?
So the answer to that, Sharon, is yes. So what you will do is you will look at when you believe your downturn is going to occur. So let's just say you believe it's going to happen in June. You can then choose June as that month and you can enroll on that basis. All that will happen is you'll qualify from that particular date. So if you didn't receive that downturn for the April period, you won't have necessarily paid your employees in April under the JobKeeper scheme, so you wouldn't be entitled to get the reimbursement from them. But the answer is yes. All because you haven't enrolled now does not mean you can't enroll going forward. The key is that you will have paid your employees for that relevant period. So yes, you can enroll now, for example, the June period. Now, Sharon, if you need to speak to one of my senior advisors, I'll get your info from Dominique, and anybody else who'd like to understand better. If you haven't already enrolled, but you believe that you will see that downturn, we can absolutely assist you with that process, because the answer is yes.
Wonderful. And I'm just going to throw back to Mark because I know he's got a comment to make here.
I just wanted to, in this road to normality, Minister, just speak specifically about the catering and hospitality industry,
Yep.
because it is a very big and important part of the sector. And I think people are really chomping at the bit to get to the pub and have a beer and sit down with friends and have a meal. Now, we're in the early stages of this rollout, but this 10 people maximum per venue. I don't know what science is behind that, because the practicalities of that for larger venues is they can't simply open for 10 people. If you're going to restock, depending on the size of your restaurant with food and beverage, it could be anything from $50,000 to $200,000. So I just hope that as we go forward, if a 400 square metre building restaurant is limited to 10 people and a 40 square metre restaurant is limited to 10 people, in reality, it's not going to work. So I know we've got to be very cautious about opening things up too quickly, but also the restaurateurs are saying, okay, well, if I open my restaurant and then a group was in the day before and then 2 days later they get diagnosed with COVID through the app, what happens to me? Do I have to shut my restaurant down? Do I have to isolate my staff? So I just think whilst it's in the embryonic stage, we just need to be very clear in terms of the guidelines and the what ifs, what happens if this happens, if people visit.
Mark, absolutely. Incredibly important point to raise. Hence why ensuring that, and I know you have already done this, and I know that you're releasing your further documentation today, but having that COVID safe plan, and the restaurant and catering is the perfect example because of the number of touch points. Fundamentally different. People ask me, well, what should an accounting firm do? Well, fundamentally different to what you guys in restaurant and catering are going to be doing. Because in restaurant and catering, everything you do involves touching something or someone. So getting that real understanding in particular of what Safe Work Australia says you should do, but also ensuring that you have that regular contact with your members in the event that COVID-19 is diagnosed in a workplace. Just on that and the 10 people, you are right, that is the feedback that we are receiving, and that is why in my home state, 18th of May, next Monday, we move automatically to 20. Unfortunately, for the next 6 to 7 weeks, the states are the ones who implement these rules on the ground. So it's really putting pressure on the individual states. And you can see where the Northern Territory are. I think the pubs open very shortly in the Northern Territory if they haven't opened already. Within 6 weeks, hopefully, if we get this right, if we get the suppression strategy to work, we will move towards the 100 people. So you are right. This is the feedback that we are receiving. To the extent that you can open, I would encourage you to open so that the strategy can be tested on the ground, but also put that pressure on the state governments. In Western Australia, we're moving to 20 people. The NT have moved already, and I'm not quite sure what Dan Andrews has announced today. We'll get feedback on this, but the more pressure that we can put on the state governments to increase those numbers, because you're right, it's not necessarily viable for the bigger ones. I'm not going to say that it is, but we need to put the pressure on the state governments as they're the ultimate decision makers on the ground.
Okay, thank you. Dom?
Minister, some of the obviously difficulties that have been experienced by some of our retailers is based on the fact that we have different rules for each of the states and territories, which is causing a whole raft of problems. What is your advice for those members that are experiencing difficulties in a particular state or territory, to go to them directly, to continue to feed that information to you?
Feed it both to us, because obviously the National Cabinet still meets, but it is very, very important that you feed it through to the relevant minister or the relevant shadow minister in a particular state. Because ultimately the National Cabinet, and Scott, our Prime Minister, has been very clear from our perspective. July. We want that economy opened up in a COVID-safe manner by July, and the sooner we can in July, the better. We need to move 850,000 people from job keeper and job seeker straight back into jobs. That is our mission as a federal government. But we do acknowledge we are a federation of states. I'm pleased that in my home state, we're moving to 20 people. I spoke to my counterpart on Friday in the NT. They are delighted to move as quickly as possible. Friday, the 15th of May, the NT, they are reopening their pubs. The key is feedback, and put pressure in particular on the states, the relevant state in which you operate, to do the right thing. We also need to all do the right thing. Download the COVID Safe app. And you are right, Mark, it goes back to both what you and Dominique have said. Confidence, Australians coming into my workplace and those working in my workplace, they have confidence they are in a COVID-safe environment. And if we can give that, then we'll move towards that July deadline sooner rather than later.
Wonderful. Look, I think that, obviously in terms of confidence within the community, there's certainly concern about those unemployment rates, because very much for retail, it's about discretionary spend and what people are able to spend. And we have seen an increase in job seeker. Is that likely to be maintained at this stage?
No, and that's why, look, on Thursday the numbers come out, and it is not going to be good by any stretch of the imagination, and we all know that. We've had approximately 1 million job seeker claims processed, but did we expect that? Yes. So it is not something that is going to shock Australians. What we now need to do, though, and this is why the Prime Minister, via the National Cabinet, I don't think he could be stronger. Our focus now, we had a health focus for very obvious reasons. We didn't want to see people die. When you look at where we are on that health basis compared to other countries, taking into account population, the UK, 110 times the amount of deaths in Australia. France, 100, the US, 50. You wouldn't want to be anywhere else other than Australia in terms of people dying. But our focus now has got to be, those 1 million people who've had their unemployment claims processed. We want to see 850,000 people now move back into the workforce. According to Treasury, if implemented, the 3-step process, which was announced on Friday, could see some 850,000 jobs restored over the next few months. That is our job now. That is the war we are now fighting, the unemployment war, and we are very upfront about that as a government. We cannot afford to have people on job seeker for longer than they need to be. And as far as we're concerned, get that economy back up and running. That's our focus now, and shift people from job seeker back into work. That is our focus now as a government.
We're certainly very keen to see that, especially in some of our CBD areas. I mean, those offices, having people return back to those offices is quite crucial, especially for retailers that are in that space. Right now there's a bit of conflicting information going from states that are advising people to remain working from home. What is the view of the federal government on that? Should people be working from home at this time?
Return to work in a COVID-safe manner, unless it is not safe to do so. So if you've got a cold, don't go back to work, go get yourself tested. We've extended the testing regime in all states and territories. But from our perspective, go back to work in a COVID-safe manner, subject obviously to the restrictions that are in place. But, it is interesting in terms of Western Australia, just to give you a flavour of what it's like when a state government takes steps to reopen the economy. I'm in Canberra, admittedly, but I have people texting me all weekend in relation to the number of people that have gone back to shopping centres in that physical presence, maintaining the social distancing. People are getting pretty good at doing that. But just that announcement that you're reopening the economy is bringing people out. It is getting them spending. And that is what we need to do. So pretty much as a federal government, again, each state will make its own decisions. But from the federal government's perspective, we want to now see people return to work in a COVID-safe manner.
Yeah, look, I think that we're all very eager for that to occur. Just some of the other questions coming that have come through from our membership around various things. How is the government planning to balance the need to get shoppers returning to shopping centres with the need to practice effective and social distancing? Because we've seen a bit of, over the weekend, obviously, issues where there's too many crowds and then they become very difficult to handle. What's the government's advice about that?
Look, and that's one of the reasons we are crawling before we're walking in terms of the stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. We need people to show us in stage 1 that they are prepared to accept some responsibility, but at the same time, for those businesses that are able to now open, that you do have your COVID-safe workplace plan put in place. And this really does fall back to industry associations to be working with their members to say, guys, this is actually really serious. This is really serious. There is going to be an uptick in the number of people contracting COVID-19. That's not unexpected. What we need to do together is manage it. So unless you have that COVID-safe workplace, we will not be proving to the individual state and territory health authorities that we're able to take those next steps. So certainly from the government's perspective, I encourage everybody to go onto the safe work site. The reason being, you don't just have to be an employer. We've actually done it across 23 industries, and I've gone on and had a look at it myself, and in particular in your industry, you can actually now click on, I'm an employer, I'm an employee, and actually have a look at the steps we all need to take. Now, one of the really interesting questions and answers on the Safe Work website in relation to your industry is, what happens though if I'm in that environment whereby you can't at all times maintain 1.5 metres? It actually says, it doesn't say you're ruled out automatically. What it says is you need to then have a look at what other measures you have in place. There are going to be workplaces where clearly, if I'm behind a bar, if I'm in a retail outlet, I am going to come into physical contact with someone else. But don't be scared. It doesn't mean you can't open. All it means is you have got to look at, what else am I doing to maintain that COVID-safe workplace? Just so you know, what the skills ministers fast-tracked, first time in Australia's history we've managed to do this, we have fast-tracked the short course on infection disease training. It's now 25 hours. You can do a lot of it online, and then we're adapting the workplace part of it to different workplaces. Have someone in your organisation undertake that training. The reason being, you will then know exactly what to do for infection disease control in your particular workplace. So there will be ways that we can manage where we're going forward. But certainly from the federal government's perspective, we want to see you open, and that means working together to get it right.
Just had a question come in from Jamie. Is there a likelihood that the government will reduce the JobKeeper payments sooner than the end of the scheme? For example, remove casuals or remove businesses that are in industries that have improved?
Okay, so that's something that the government will look at in June. We've always been very upfront that there would be the review at the 3-month process. But at the outset, we did say it was a 6-month payment. So at this point in time, there's been no indication given that we would get rid of it. I think, though, the indication that's now been given is that beyond that 6 months, we're going to be in a fundamentally different world. Our focus at the moment is getting you through this initial period, hence the $130 billion payment. Thank you to all of you out there who've embraced it, 5.1 million employees. This is why it is so important, as I've said, to get that information about what's going to be happening in your particular economy post-June, for when we do the review to really understand what the impact has been on the ground.
Mark, you have a question?
Minister, as you would be aware, a lot of businesses leading into this, retailers in particular, leading into this COVID-19 were struggling. And our advice to a lot of retailers is get to the finish line and things will get better. The struggle is getting to the finish line. Two of the biggest costs for retailers and businesses are occupancy costs and labour costs.
Yep.
Do you have a view of what the world will look like after we get back on track?
Yeah, look, and in terms of the occupancy costs in particular, I mean, that is something that is pretty much dealt with by states and territories. And one of the things we've been very clear as a federal government is we've got to sit down and work it out between the landlord and the tenant. Very much, there is no point in actually throwing your tenant out in particular, because who's going to replace them at the end of the day? So you will see that the National Cabinet has addressed this. It's not perfect. Nothing's going to be perfect in the world that we live in, but actually encouraging people to sit down and work things out in this new world is very much the position that we take. Ultimately, you know, market forces will be market forces, but to the extent that we can encourage people to sit down and work through this together, we should be. You know, in terms of the industrial relations environment that we're going to find ourselves in going forward, I think what we have showed is that when we all face a common goal, you can actually make changes. Hence the changes we're able to make to the Fair Work Act, because the parties sat down together and worked through what the issues are. I hope that there is a much stronger focus on ensuring that, and as the Prime Minister said, this is going to be a business-led recovery. It is not going to be a government-led recovery, which means that we need to know as a government what are the levers you need us to pull. We've been pretty upfront. There won't be any new taxes. In fact, to the extent that we can give you tax relief, that has got to be our role as a government. But also, to the extent that we can give you regulatory relief. You know, regulation is just it is a wall that you hit when you are actually trying to expand your business and create more jobs. So our focus as a government is very much going to be what tax relief we can give you, but also the regulation that we can cut going forward so that it is a business-led recovery and not a government-led recovery going forward.
Yeah, well, we're going to wrap up very shortly, but just you've touched on this. So the government's done a great job in providing relief to stay in business. Yep. And you've touched on some of the incentives coming out of this. What broadly do you think we can do for businesses once we come out of this in terms of creating incentives to do well and to prosper?
I think very much this is where sort of I can put my hat on as the Minister for Skills, because we need to work with you to ensure that you don't have a one-size-fits-all, that we're actually giving Australians the skills they need to operate in your workplaces effectively. So I think the skills agenda has a huge role to play here. But I think also from the federal government's perspective, what are the key areas of the economy that you really can stimulate to ensure that you have that ongoing pipeline of jobs? Construction, and infrastructure. Infrastructure creates jobs. Infrastructure then ensures that you have those pipelines of jobs in different states and territories. Once you have that pipeline, people are actually spending money. When people are spending money, what are they doing? They're actually spending it in your industry. So from the federal government's perspective, there are key areas of the economy that we have to use as those basic foundations to ensure that we're providing the platform for other areas of the economy. But insofar as, as again, I go back to what has the Prime Minister said? Business-led, business-led, business-led. We have been very upfront about that. And this is that real opportunity for industries to step forward and say, this is what we need from our federal government going forward. As long as everything is tied to increasing employment, that's the answer to any question that we now have as a federal government. What does the proposal you put forward mean in terms of increasing employment? And if we can all be on that page together, we will successfully reopen the Australian economy.
Okay, Dom, I think we might have time for one more question, then we'll wrap it up. So did you want to...
We have a question that's just come in. Is the federal government going to push the state governments to abolish payroll tax? I'm currently being taxed the equivalent of a full salary that I could use to employ a new person this year.
Oh, look, fantastic question. And whenever I speak to my state and territory counterparts, I don't think there's a conversation you have where you don't raise it. Certainly from my perspective, I know my thoughts on those taxes. They are a tax on employment. I congratulate the New South Wales government and Gladys Berejiklian on the announcements that she has made. I notice other state governments have come out and said, no, we're not going anywhere near it. I think that the more you can push, the more evidence you have, in particular, as a number of states are heading towards elections. If you can't get a commitment from that state government, get a commitment from the opposition. Put as much pressure as you can, because I agree, it is a tax on employment, and all states, to the extent that they can, should be going down the path of New South Wales, quite frankly.
Okay, Minister, final words, and then we'll throw to Dom to do a vote of thanks, and then we'll wish you on your way. So, did you want to add any final comments?
Oh, is this for me to add final comments, or Dominique?
No, you.
Oh, sorry, you said Dominique. No, look, as I said, I cannot thank you enough for giving me this opportunity today. We've had a very good relationship, both Mark, Dominique and I, for many, many years now. You provide me with constructive criticism on a regular basis, which we always appreciate. My phone is always there for you. My door is always open for you. I place great value on your role as part of the economic recovery, and certainly anything that we can do, as a federal government, to continue to work with you. That offer is always there. And again, I do not underestimate the pain that you have been through. I cannot thank you enough for everything that you have done, you do, but more than that, the role that you will play with us hand in hand going forward to ensure that we get those 150,000 people back to where we need them to be, and that is, of course, in gainful employment. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity today, and I look forward to the successful launch of your COVID-safe document later on today.
Thanks, Minister. I'll just get Dom to do a vote of thanks, but just from my point of view, look, we really do value the relationship we have with you and your department and your government, and congratulations on the way you've managed this to date in what is a very difficult environment and circumstances. So thank you. Dom?
Oh, Minister, it is always an absolute pleasure to have you come and speak to our membership, because you are an absolute wealth of knowledge and you really take the time to understand what our members' interests are and certainly what their concerns are. And the information you provided today has been such a great help. Certainly we're looking forward to receiving all of their feedback so that we can provide it to you to assist the government in making decisions moving forward. But we would really like to commend the government and all the work that you've been doing in this space, because it has made a big difference in a very, very difficult time for many of our members. And we simply appreciate your time and taking the time out to speak with them directly today. So thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
well,
I
that
look forward to doing this sooner rather than later yet again.
Wonderful. Thank you.
okay, well, that concludes this little event. And in the interest of COVID-19, please everybody stay safe, healthy, and keep your distance. All the very
Thank you,
best.
Mark. Thank you, Dominique.
Cheers.
Have a wonderful day,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Stay safe.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Goodbye.